How to survive as an elderly person in a village. There was a time when growing old did not mean moving into a comfortable apartment, calling a taxi, ordering food from a phone, or having a doctor only a few minutes away. For many elderly people living in villages, life was much simpler. But simple did not always mean easy. An old person living in a village had to understand the weather, protect their food, collect water, maintain their home, grow something to eat, prepare for winter, avoid injuries, and, most importantly, know when they needed help. They did not survive because they were stronger. They survived because they learned how to prepare. And many of those lessons are still useful today. Imagine an elderly man living alone in a small village. His house is surrounded by farmland. There is a small garden behind the house, a few chickens walking around the yard, some firewood stacked against the wall, and a water container near the kitchen. He wakes up before sunrise. The village is quiet. There is no traffic, no phone notifications, no busy streets, only birds, animals, wind, and the sound of someone opening a wooden door somewhere nearby. He slowly gets out of bed. For a younger person, standing up may take only a few seconds. For an elderly person, that same movement requires care. A sudden movement can cause dizziness or loss of balance. So the first survival lesson is simple. Never rush. Take your time. Sit up first. Take a moment. Make sure you feel steady. Then stand. This small habit can prevent a dangerous fall, and for an elderly person, preventing an accident is often more important than knowing how to deal with one afterward. Chapter 1. Water. The first thing every village household needs is water. Without water, almost everything becomes difficult. Cooking, cleaning, drinking, taking medicine, washing, feeding animals, growing vegetables. In many villages, water may come from a well, hand pump, spring, river, or community supply. But an elderly person should never depend completely on a single source. If the pump breaks, if the electricity goes out, if the well becomes difficult to access, or if bad weather makes the journey dangerous, having stored water can make a huge difference. Water should be kept in clean, covered containers. The containers should be easy enough to handle. This is important. A huge container may hold more water, but if an elderly person cannot safely lift it, it becomes useless. Instead, smaller containers can be filled and stored where they are easy to reach. The water storage area should also be kept clean. Never store drinking water next to chemicals, fuel, pesticides, or other dangerous substances. And if the safety of the water source is uncertain, it should be treated appropriately before drinking. The goal is not to collect as much water as possible. The goal is to make clean water available without creating another danger. An elderly person should also plan the route to the water source. If the path is steep, slippery, muddy, or full of loose stones, it may become dangerous. A simple walking stick can provide extra stability. Better still, ask a neighbor for help with heavy containers. There is no shame in asking. Survival is not about proving that you can do everything alone. It is about staying safe. Chapter 2. Food. The next problem is food. A village may have farms everywhere, but that does not mean food is automatically available. Growing food requires planning. An elderly person should focus on crops that are useful, familiar, and manageable. A small garden can be surprisingly valuable. Tomatoes, onions, potatoes, beans, peas, leafy vegetables, herbs. These foods can provide variety without requiring a huge farm. But the garden should be designed around the person's physical abilities. There is no point creating a massive field that requires hours of hard labor if the person cannot safely maintain it. A smaller garden that can actually be managed is much better. Raised planting areas can sometimes reduce the need to bend down. Tools should have comfortable handles. Frequently used items should be kept close, and gardening should be divided into short tasks. Instead of working continuously for several hours, work for a manageable period and rest. The objective is not maximum production. The objective is dependable production. Chapter 3. Food storage. Growing food is only half the job. The other half is keeping it. Imagine a bad week, heavy rain, a damaged road, a broken vehicle, a sick family member, a market that cannot be reached. If the home has no stored food, a simple inconvenience can quickly become a serious problem. That is why traditional village households often stored food for difficult periods: grains, rice, beans, flour, dried vegetables, potatoes, onions, salt, other foods with long storage lives. The exact foods depend on the region and climate, but the principle is universal. Do not wait until the emergency begins to prepare. Store food before you need it. Food should be kept dry, clean, protected from insects and rodents, and regularly checked. Old supplies should be used first, while newer supplies replace them. This simple rotation prevents food from being forgotten until it becomes unusable. And an elderly person should not store everything in one place. If one storage area becomes damaged by water, insects, fire, or another problem, having everything there could result in losing the entire supply. Chapter 4: Firewood and Heat. Then comes the cold. Winter can transform a peaceful village into a difficult environment. The same path that was easy to walk in summer can become muddy, icy, or covered with snow. The same house that felt comfortable during the day can become extremely cold at night. For this reason, winter preparation should begin before winter arrives. Firewood should be collected early if wood is the traditional heating source. It should be stored somewhere dry and safely accessible. Do not wait until the coldest night to discover that there is not enough fuel. But there is another important rule. Fire is useful only when it is controlled. A heating fire should never be left unattended. Smoke and carbon monoxide can be extremely dangerous. Ventilation and appropriate heating equipment matter. An elderly person should have a simple plan for what to do if the heating system fails. Warm clothing, blankets, dry bedding, extra food, safe lighting, and a way to contact someone for help. Staying warm is not about making a huge fire. It is about preparing the entire home. Chapter 5: Making the home safe for an elderly person. The home itself can become one of the biggest dangers. A broken step that a young person ignores can cause a serious injury to an older person. A loose rug, a dark hallway, a slippery floor, a bucket left in a walking path, a badly placed chair, a damaged roof. Small problems can create big consequences. So one of the best survival strategies is to inspect the house regularly. Walk slowly through every room. Look at the floor. Look at the stairs. Check the doors. Check the windows. Check the roof. Look for water leaks. Look for loose boards. Look for anything that could cause someone to trip. Lighting is especially important. The path from the bedroom to the bathroom should be easy to see at night. A simple light can be more valuable than an expensive piece of equipment. Furniture should be positioned so there is enough space to walk. Frequently used items should not be stored on very high shelves. Heavy objects should be kept somewhere accessible. The safest home is not necessarily the strongest home. It is the home designed around the person living inside it. Chapter 6: Walking safely. Walking is one of the most important skills for maintaining independence. But an elderly person should recognize that balance can change with age. Village paths can contain mud, stones, holes, roots, water, and uneven surfaces. So walking should be deliberate. Good footwear matters. A walking stick may help provide stability. During bad weather, unnecessary trips should be avoided. And if a person feels weak, dizzy, or unstable, stopping is better than trying to continue. One of the biggest mistakes an elderly person can make is believing, "I have walked this road for 50 years, so nothing can happen." Experience helps, but experience does not eliminate risk. Conditions change, bodies change, weather changes. The safest approach is to respect both. Chapter 7: Animals. Animals can be extremely useful in village life. Chickens can provide eggs. Goats may provide milk. Other animals can provide food, materials, or companionship. But animals also require physical work. An elderly person should keep only the animals they can safely manage. A large animal that constantly requires heavy lifting or difficult handling may become a burden. Animal areas should be organized. Feed should be stored safely. Water should be accessible. The paths should remain clear. And animals should be handled carefully. A frightened animal can injure even a strong person. For an elderly person, the consequences can be much worse. The goal is to benefit from animals without allowing them to create unnecessary danger. Chapter 8. Basic Health Preparation. One of the hardest parts of rural living can be distance from medical care. A village may be peaceful, but a clinic or hospital may be far away. That means preparation matters. Important medication should be managed carefully according to medical instructions. Essential health supplies should be organized. A small first aid kit can contain basic items such as clean bandages, antiseptic supplies, and other appropriate essentials. Important medical information should be easy to find. If an emergency happens, family members or neighbors should know where important information is kept. The person should also know how to reach medical assistance. A phone should be charged. Emergency contacts should be saved, and if mobile coverage is unreliable, the household should know which nearby person can help communicate during an emergency. This is not fear. This is preparation. Chapter 9. The power of neighbors. Perhaps the most important survival resource in a village is not food, not firewood, not water. It is community. For thousands of years, people survived difficult environments by helping each other. An elderly person should know the people living nearby. Who has a vehicle? Who can bring medicine? Who can repair a roof? Who can collect water? Who can check on the house during a storm? Who can help if someone falls? These relationships can save lives, and help should work both ways. An elderly person may not be able to carry heavy objects, but they may have knowledge, experience, advice, or skills that younger people do not have. A village works best when generations help each other. The old can teach, the young can assist. Everyone benefits. Chapter 10. Preparing for bad weather. Weather can change quickly. Heavy rain can turn roads into mud. Strong winds can damage roofs. Extreme heat can cause dehydration. Cold weather can create dangerous conditions, so an elderly person should pay attention to weather warnings and local conditions. Before a storm, secure loose objects outside. Check the roof. Bring important items indoors. Keep drinking water available. Keep essential medications and documents protected. Charge communication devices. And make sure someone knows that the elderly person is at home. During extreme weather, staying indoors may be safer than traveling. Do not take unnecessary risks just to complete a normal daily task. A garden can wait. A market trip can wait. A repair can wait. Safety comes first. Chapter 11. Nighttime. Night changes the village. Paths become difficult to see. Animals move around. The temperature drops. And an elderly person's balance may be less reliable in darkness. A reliable flashlight or lantern should be easy to reach. It should not be hidden in a cupboard across the house. Keep it somewhere you can find immediately. A backup light can also be useful. The route to the bathroom should remain clear. Doors should be secured appropriately. And unnecessary outdoor trips should be avoided. If something outside can wait until morning, let it wait. There is no prize for walking around a dark village at midnight. Chapter 12. Money and essential supplies. Survival also depends on financial planning. An elderly person should avoid spending everything on unnecessary items while having no reserve for emergencies. Keep essential household supplies organized. Know what needs to be purchased regularly. Plan market trips. Buy durable essentials when they are reasonably available, but avoid excessive hoarding. The goal is a practical reserve, not a room filled with unused products. A simple written list can help. Food, water, heating fuel, personal necessities, medical essentials, important household repairs. Keeping track of these items makes it easier to notice when something is running low. Chapter 13. Learning to rest. One lesson many older people struggle with is accepting their physical limits. For decades, they may have worked from sunrise to sunset. They may have carried heavy loads, worked in fields, built houses, raised children, managed animals. But aging changes the body. That does not mean a person becomes useless. It means the strategy has to change. Work smarter, not harder. Divide difficult tasks. Use tools. Ask for help. Take breaks. Do important jobs during daylight and good weather. Leave unnecessary work for another day. Rest is not laziness. Rest is part of survival. Chapter 14, Keeping the Mind Active. Survival is not only physical. Loneliness can be a serious problem for an elderly person living in a remote village. A person can have food and water and still feel isolated. Talking with neighbors helps. Visiting family helps. Teaching younger people old skills helps. Reading, writing, gardening, music, religious or cultural activities, and simple hobbies can give structure to the day. A routine can be powerful. Wake up, eat breakfast, check the house, take care of animals, work in the garden, rest, prepare food, talk with someone, prepare for the evening. A predictable routine reduces confusion and helps a person notice when something is wrong. Chapter 15, Traditional Knowledge. Older villagers often possess knowledge that cannot easily be replaced. They know which paths flood first. They know when certain crops should be planted. They know where water can sometimes be found. They understand local weather patterns. They know how to preserve certain foods. They know which repairs a house needs before winter. This knowledge should not disappear. Write it down. Teach it to younger family members. Record important information. Pass it on. A village survives not only through physical resources, but through accumulated knowledge. Chapter 16, Emergency Planning. Every elderly person should have a simple emergency plan. Not a complicated document, just a few clear answers. Where will I go if the house becomes unsafe? Who will I call? Who lives closest? Where are my important documents? Where are my essential supplies? How will I get medical help? What happens if the electricity fails? What happens if the road becomes blocked? What happens if I cannot walk safely? These questions should be answered before the emergency, because during an emergency, thinking becomes harder. Preparation turns confusion into action. Chapter 17, the most important rule there is one rule that connects everything. Do not wait for a problem to become an emergency. Repair the roof before the storm. Collect firewood before winter. Store water before the pump breaks. Buy necessary supplies before the roads become dangerous. Ask for help before the task becomes impossible. Prepare food before you run out. And tell someone when you are not feeling well. The best survival strategy is prevention. Chapter 18, A Day in the Life. Now imagine that same elderly villager again. The sun is rising. He wakes slowly. He sits on the edge of his bed. He waits until he feels steady. Then he stands. He opens the door. Fresh morning air enters the room. The chickens are already moving around the yard. He checks his water supply. He checks the weather. He looks at the garden. He does not try to finish everything at once. He waters the plants. Then he rests. Later, he feeds the animals. He prepares a simple breakfast. He checks the firewood. He looks around the house. Is anything broken? Is anything leaking? Is anything blocking the walking path? He notices a loose board. Instead of ignoring it, he marks it for repair. A neighbor passes by. They talk for a few minutes. The neighbor asks if everything is okay. He says yes, but he also mentions the loose board. The neighbor offers to help repair it later. This is what survival really looks like. It is not dramatic. There are no explosions, no heroic battles, no impossible challenges. It is simply one small decision after another. Prepare, check, rest, repair, store, ask, help, repeat. Chapter 19, When help is needed, there is also a point where independence should not become stubbornness. If an elderly person is injured, suddenly confused, extremely weak, having difficulty breathing, experiencing severe chest pain, or facing another serious medical emergency, professional medical assistance should be sought immediately. Trying to solve every problem alone can turn a manageable situation into a dangerous one. Knowing when to call for help is itself a survival skill. A strong person is not someone who refuses help. A strong person knows when help is necessary. Chapter 20, The Real Meaning of Survival. When people hear the word survival, they often imagine wilderness, mountains, forests, deserts, storms, but survival can happen anywhere, even in a quiet village. For an elderly person, survival is often about maintaining independence while understanding limitations. It is about keeping the home safe, having food, having water, staying warm, protecting health, maintaining relationships, preparing for bad weather, and never being too proud to ask for help. The village itself can become part of the safety system. A neighbor can become a lifeline. A garden can become a food source. A walking stick can become protection against a fall. A small food reserve can become security during a difficult week. And simple preparation can make the difference between a problem and a disaster. Growing old does not mean that life has to stop. It means the way we live has to evolve. The strongest survival skill is not strength. It is wisdom. Knowing what matters, knowing what can wait, knowing what must be prepared, and knowing when another person should be called. Because, in the end, the elderly person who survives village life successfully is not the one who does everything alone. It is the one who understands the environment, respects their own limits, prepares before problems arrive, and stays connected to the people around them. That is how generations survived before modern conveniences. And those lessons are still valuable today, not because life should return to the past, but because sometimes the simplest lessons from the past are the ones that help us prepare for the future. How to Survive an Elderly Person in a Village, Part 2, Chapter 21. The village is your environment. An elderly person living in a village needs to understand something very important. The village is not simply a place where the house is located. The entire environment becomes part of daily life. The road, the fields, the trees, the water source, the animals, the weather, the neighbors. Even the time of day can affect how safely a person moves through the village. A road that looks harmless in the morning may become dangerous after heavy rain. A field that is easy to cross during daylight can become difficult after sunset. A water source that has always been reliable may suddenly become unavailable. This is why observation is such an important survival skill. Before doing anything, look around. What is the weather doing? Is the ground dry? Is the path clear? Are there animals nearby? Is the task really necessary today? These simple questions can prevent unnecessary problems. An elderly person does not need to defeat the environment. They need to understand it. Chapter 22. Learn the safest routes. Every village has several ways to reach the same destination. One path may be shorter, another may be safer. An elderly person should learn which routes are safest. The shortest route is not always the best route. A path with fewer steep sections may be worth taking even if it takes 10 extra minutes. A road with better lighting may be safer after sunset. A wider path may be easier when carrying something. A route near houses may provide more opportunities to ask for help. Over time, these routes become part of a person's survival map. You do not need a sophisticated map. You simply need to know, where is the safest path? Where are the dangerous areas? Where can I rest? Where can I find people? Where can I get help? Knowledge of the local environment becomes especially valuable during bad weather. Chapter 23. Keep essential items close. One common mistake is storing important things too far away. An elderly person may keep their flashlight in a storage room. Their phone may be charging in another building. Their walking stick may be outside. Their shoes may be somewhere difficult to reach. This creates unnecessary risk. Important everyday items should be kept where they can be reached easily. A phone, a flashlight, glasses, necessary medications, water, walking support, emergency contact information. The idea is simple. If something goes wrong, the person should not have to search the entire house to find what they need. Organization becomes a survival tool. Chapter 24. The morning check. A simple morning inspection can prevent many problems. After waking up, look outside. Check the weather. Look at the condition of the path. Check the animals. Check the water supply. Check the house. Is there any unusual smell? Any water leak? Any damaged wall? Any broken window? Anything unusual around the property? This does not need to take more than a few minutes, but these few minutes can reveal a problem while it is still small. A small roof leak is easier to fix than a damaged ceiling. A nearly empty water container is easier to refill than an empty one during an emergency. A sick animal is easier to manage when noticed early. The habit is simple. Observe first. Act second. Chapter 25. Learning to use simple tools. Modern technology can be useful, but simple tools remain valuable in rural life. A strong walking stick, a comfortable hand tool, a lightweight bucket, A small flashlight, a good pair of shoes, a simple stool, a sturdy chair. These objects may seem ordinary, but the right tool can reduce physical effort significantly. An elderly person should not choose tools simply because they are traditional. Choose tools that make work safer. If a tool is too heavy, replace it. If a handle is uncomfortable, improve it. If reaching a high shelf requires climbing, move the items. Survival often comes down to reducing unnecessary physical effort. Chapter 26, Never Climb When You Can Avoid It. One of the most dangerous habits for older people is climbing onto unstable objects. A chair, a bucket, a box, a pile of wood, something that looks stable, may move unexpectedly. If an item is stored too high, ask someone to bring it down. Better yet, reorganize the storage areas so frequently used items remain within comfortable reach. A few seconds of convenience are not worth a serious fall. The best solution is prevention. Chapter 27, Safe Farming. Farming can keep an elderly person active. It provides food, movement, purpose, and connection to the land. But farming should change as the body changes. Heavy digging may need to be reduced. Large loads should be divided into smaller ones. Long periods of bending should be avoided. Work should be done during comfortable temperatures. Hot midday conditions can be especially difficult. Take breaks. Drink appropriate amounts of safe water. Wear suitable clothing. Protect yourself from excessive sun exposure. And stop when your body tells you to stop. A garden should support your life. Your life should not be sacrificed for the garden. Chapter 28, Hot Weather. Winter is not the only dangerous season. Extreme heat can also become a serious challenge. During very hot weather, an elderly person should avoid unnecessary outdoor work during the hottest part of the day. Outdoor tasks can often be moved to early morning or later evening when conditions are more comfortable. Water should be available. The house should have as much ventilation and cooling as safely possible. Light clothing can help, and if someone becomes unusually weak, confused, faint, or seriously unwell in extreme heat, they should seek medical assistance. Heat can become dangerous faster than many people realize. Chapter 29, Rain and Flooding. Rain changes the village quickly. Dry dirt becomes mud. Small streams become stronger. Low roads may become difficult to cross. Water may enter homes. An elderly person should never underestimate familiar terrain during heavy rain. The same path used every day can become unsafe. If flooding is possible, important belongings should be moved to safer locations. Documents should be protected from water. Food should be kept above areas where water could reach. Electrical hazards should be taken seriously, and if local authorities or emergency services advise evacuation, that advice should be followed. The goal is not to prove that you can stay. The goal is to stay alive. Chapter 30, Protecting Important Documents. Documents are easy to ignore until they are needed. Identity documents, property papers, medical information, emergency contacts, banking information, important family records. If these are lost during a flood, fire, or other emergency, replacing them can be difficult. Keep important documents organized in a secure, protected location. Where appropriate, copies can also be stored safely elsewhere. Family members should know where essential documents can be found. The less confusion there is during an emergency, the better. Chapter 31, The Firewood System. Instead of collecting firewood whenever the supply becomes low, create a system. Use older dry wood first. Keep newer wood protected from rain. Stack it somewhere stable. Keep enough space around the storage area. Do not create a pile that can collapse. Do not place firewood where it blocks doors or walking paths. The goal is to make heating fuel easy to access without creating another hazard. A good system turns a difficult task into a routine. Chapter 32, Cooking Safely. Cooking is one of the most common daily activities in a village home, but cooking fires and hot surfaces can be dangerous. Keep flammable materials away from flames. Do not leave cooking unattended when there is a significant fire risk. Keep handles positioned safely. Avoid carrying very heavy pots. If a pot is too heavy, divide the contents. Keep the kitchen floor dry, and make sure smoke can escape safely. A small kitchen accident can become serious very quickly. Chapter 33, Storing Medicine Correctly. Medicine should be organized. An elderly person may have several different medications or health-related supplies. Confusion can happen when containers look similar. Keeping medicines in their original labeled containers and following the prescribed instructions can reduce mistakes. Do not take someone else's medicine simply because they say it worked for them. Do not change prescribed treatment without appropriate medical guidance. And keep medicines stored according to their instructions. If something is confusing, ask a healthcare professional or trusted caregiver for clarification. Good organization is part of safety. Chapter 34, The Role of Family can make village life much safer. But family members may not always live nearby. That is why communication matters. A simple routine can help: a daily call, a message, a neighbor checking in, a relative visiting regularly. The exact method does not matter as much as consistency. If an elderly person normally communicates every day and suddenly stops, someone may notice that something is wrong. This is especially useful for people living alone. Chapter 35, Create a check-in system. Imagine an elderly person lives alone. Every morning, they send a simple message to a family member. Good morning, everything is fine. If the message does not arrive by a certain time, the family member contacts them. If there is no response, a nearby neighbor can check. This creates a simple safety network. It does not require expensive technology. It requires communication. The people involved should agree on what to do if the person does not respond. That way, everyone understands the plan before an emergency happens. Chapter 36, Know Your Limits. There is a dangerous sentence that many older people say: I can still do it. Sometimes they can, sometimes they cannot. Knowing the difference is extremely important. If a task requires lifting something very heavy, ask for help. If a roof requires climbing, hire or ask someone capable. If a large tree needs cutting, do not attempt it alone. If an electrical repair is dangerous, use a qualified professional. If a medical problem is serious, seek medical care. Independence does not mean refusing every form of assistance. True independence means making responsible decisions. Chapter 37, The Value of Routine. A routine gives structure to village life. Morning, water, breakfast, garden, animals, rest, lunch, small household tasks. Rest again, evening meal. Check the doors, prepare for the night. Sleep. The exact routine will differ from person to person, but predictable habits make it easier to notice changes. If the person suddenly cannot complete a normal task, that can be a warning sign. Routine also reduces unnecessary decisions, and when energy is limited, reducing unnecessary effort is valuable. Chapter 38, Keeping the Village Connection. An elderly person should avoid becoming completely isolated. Even a short conversation can matter. Talk to neighbors. Attend community events when possible. Visit relatives. Share food. Exchange information. Ask about weather. Discuss crops. Help younger people learn traditional skills. These interactions create connections, and those connections become important during difficult moments. The person who knows everyone in the village is rarely completely alone. Chapter 39, Teaching the Next Generation. Imagine an elderly farmer teaching a young person how to recognize good soil, or showing them how food was traditionally stored, or explaining how to prepare a garden for winter, or describing which local paths become dangerous after heavy rain. This knowledge is valuable. Every generation has something to teach. The elderly may not have modern technology, but they possess something else: experience. Experience is accumulated over decades. It should be shared before it disappears. Chapter 40, Surviving Without Panic. Emergencies create fear. Fear can make people move too quickly. That is dangerous. If something goes wrong, stop. Think, look around. Identify the immediate danger. Move away from it if necessary. Contact someone. Follow the emergency plan. Do not waste valuable time panicking. An elderly person may not be able to move as quickly as a younger person. That makes preparation even more important. The goal is to act early, not fast. Early. Chapter 41, When the power goes out, electricity can fail because of storms, equipment problems, or other causes. An elderly household should be prepared for temporary outages. Keep flashlights available. Keep important devices charged. Have safe lighting options. Know how to access necessary information without relying completely on electricity. If refrigeration is affected, understand how to handle food safely. Do not use unsafe indoor fuel-burning equipment as a substitute for electricity. A power outage is inconvenient. With preparation, it does not have to become a disaster. Chapter 42, Keep the path clear. Walking paths should be inspected regularly. Remove unnecessary objects. Trim plants that block the walkway. Repair uneven surfaces where possible. Keep tools and buckets away from paths. Make sure steps are visible. During rain, pay attention to slippery surfaces. At night, provide adequate lighting. The path between the bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and outside door is especially important. These are places an elderly person may need to access quickly. Chapter 43, Safe water during emergencies. If the normal water supply becomes unavailable, do not automatically assume that nearby water is safe. Streams and ponds can contain harmful contamination. Clear-looking water is not necessarily safe drinking water. Use a known safe source whenever possible. If emergency water treatment is required, follow reliable public health guidance for the specific method. Water is essential, but unsafe water can create another emergency. Chapter 44, Preparing before winter. Winter preparation should begin weeks or months before the coldest weather. Inspect the roof. Check doors and windows. Repair drafts where appropriate. Prepare warm clothing. Organize blankets. Store suitable food. Prepare heating fuels safely. Check lighting. Plan how medical needs will be handled if roads become difficult. Think about transportation. Think about communication. Think about neighbors. Winter should never arrive as a surprise. Chapter 45, A small emergency bag. An elderly person can keep a small emergency bag ready. It can contain essential personal information, basic supplies, a flashlight, communication equipment, appropriate medications according to medical instructions, water, and other necessities relevant to the household. The bag should not be so heavy that the person cannot carry it. The purpose is simple. If the house suddenly becomes unsafe, essential items are already together. Preparation reduces confusion. Chapter 46, Learning from past mistakes. Older people often remember difficult winters, floods, droughts, crop failures, power outages, illnesses, road closures. These memories are valuable. Ask, what went wrong last time? What did we not have? What should we have prepared earlier? What worked? What failed? The best survival lessons often come from previous problems. Do not simply remember the hardship. Remember the lesson. Chapter 47, Do not waste resources. Village survival also means using resources wisely. Food should not be unnecessarily wasted. Water should not be left running. Firewood should not be burned carelessly. Tools should be maintained. Clothing should be repaired when practical. Containers can often be reused for appropriate purposes. Waste less. Maintain more. A resource that is available today may be difficult to replace tomorrow. Chapter 48, The importance of cleanliness. Clean surroundings reduce many everyday problems. Keep food areas clean. Keep drinking water containers clean. Remove waste appropriately. Keep animal areas maintained. Wash hands when appropriate. Keep cooking equipment clean. A clean home is not simply about appearance. It supports safer living. Small daily habits can have large effects over time. Chapter 49, Survival is a system. At this point, something becomes clear. There is no single survival trick. There is a system. Water, food, shelter, heat, health, mobility, communication, community, preparation. Each part supports the others. If one area becomes weak, another may compensate. If water is difficult to access, neighbors may help. If farming becomes difficult, stored food provides support. If an elderly person becomes less mobile, the home can be reorganized. If weather becomes dangerous, preparation reduces the need to travel. This is what resilience looks like. Chapter 50, The final lesson. Imagine the village again. The sun is setting. The elderly man sits outside his home. The garden is quiet. The animals are settling down. Firewood is stored. Water is available. Food is prepared. The doors are secure. The path is clear. His phone is charged. His family knows he is safe. A neighbor lives nearby. Nothing dramatic is happening, and that is exactly the point. Successful survival does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a quiet evening, a safe house, a warm meal, a glass of clean water, a familiar voice from a neighbor, a garden that provides food, a routine that brings peace. The greatest survival skill is preparation, not fear, not strength, not isolation. Preparation. An elderly person can remain independent for many years when they understand their environment, respect their physical limits, maintain a safe home, store essential resources, and stay connected to other people. Village life may be difficult, but it also offers something modern life sometimes loses: community, self-reliance, knowledge, patience, and the ability to live with what is available. The old ways were not perfect, but they taught an important lesson. You do not need everything. You need enough. Enough food, enough water, enough warmth, enough preparation, enough knowledge, and enough people around you who care. Because when difficult times arrive, survival rarely depends on one extraordinary action. It depends on hundreds of small decisions made before the emergency ever begins. And for an elderly person living in a village, those small decisions can mean the difference between struggling alone and living safely, confidently, and independently. In 1933, a quarter of all Americans had no job, no paycheck, no safety net, but they survived. Some even thrived. The methods they used have been almost completely erased from memory. Number 14 on this list was so profitable that entire industries were built to destroy it. Number 3 created a black market economy worth more than some states' entire budgets. These 20 forgotten ways of making money required no boss, no office, no resume, just grit and the kind of desperate ingenuity that modern America has trained out of us. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because some of these might actually change how you think about work. Let us count them down. Number 20, collecting rags and bones. Before the recycling truck existed, there was the rag and bone man. In cities from Boston to Chicago, men and women walked the streets with hand carts or mule-drawn wagons, calling out for old clothes, animal bones, scrap metal, and paper. Textile mills paid cash for cotton and wool rags, which they shredded and then spun into new fabric. Bones went to glue factories and fertilizer plants. A good rag picker in the 1890s in New York could pull in $1 a day, roughly $28 in today's money. Enough to feed a family of 4. Immigrant neighborhoods in the Lower East Side ran on this economy. Women sorted rags by fabric type at kitchen tables, while children hauled sacks through back alleys. By 1900, an estimated 25,000 people in New York City alone earned their living from waste. The city's sanitation department eventually pushed them out, claiming the streets as public property. But for decades, rag picking was the first rung on the economic ladder for families who had nothing else to stand on. Number 19, selling apples on street corners. When the stock market crashed in 1929, the International Apple Shippers Association had a surplus problem. Their solution was to sell crates of apples on credit to unemployed men at $1.75 per crate, roughly 60 apples, which could be resold at 5 cents each. Within months, an estimated 6,000 apple sellers lined the sidewalks of New York alone. The image became the defining photograph of the Great Depression. A man in a worn suit, his hat pulled low, standing beside a wooden crate with a hand-lettered sign that read 5 cents. Some sellers earned $2 or $3 a day in good weather, enough for rent in a boarding house and a hot meal. Others stood for hours in freezing rain and sold nothing. Cities tried to ban them, and business owners complained they blocked storefronts. But for a generation of men who had lost everything, that apple crate was the last shred of dignity between them and the breadline. Number 18, taking in boarders. Before apartments had leases and landlords ran credit checks, ordinary American families opened their spare bedrooms to strangers. By 1900, census records show that roughly 1 in 5 urban households took in at least one boarder. In mill towns across New England, a widow with 3 empty rooms could earn enough from boarders to keep the house. She would cook breakfast and supper, wash linens on Mondays, and collect rent every Friday. A single room in a Pittsburgh boarding house cost between $2 and $4 a week in the 1920s. The arrangement was so common that architects designed homes with separate entrances for boarders. Children grew up sharing dinner tables with steel workers, traveling salesmen, and school teachers. The practice quietly disappeared after World War II, when suburban mortgages and zoning laws made it illegal in most residential neighborhoods. We regulated away one of the oldest survival strategies in American life. Number 17. Gathering and selling wild ginseng. Deep in the hollows of Appalachia, families dug ginseng root from the forest floor and sold it to buyers who shipped it straight to China. The trade stretches back to the 1700s, when fur traders realized that American ginseng fetched extraordinary prices in Asian markets. By the 1870s, dried ginseng root sold for $3 to $5 a pound at trading posts in West Virginia and Kentucky, a fortune. When a coal miner earned $1 a day, entire families spent September and October in the woods, children spotting the distinctive red berries while parents carefully dug around the roots with hand-forged tools. A single season could earn enough to carry a family through winter. The knowledge passed quietly from generation to generation. Which ridge had the oldest plants? Which northing slopes held the biggest roots? Overharvesting and habitat loss have made wild ginseng increasingly rare, but in remote mountain communities, the tradition persists. Diggers still walk the same hollows their great-grandparents walked, searching for the route that connected Appalachian poverty to a market on the other side of the world. Number 16. Selling homemade food door to door. Long before food trucks and Instagram bakeries, women in every American city cooked food in their kitchens and sold it on the street. In the 1920s and the 1930s, black women in the South baked sweet potato pies, fried chicken and pound cakes, then carried them through neighborhoods on trays balanced on their heads or packed into baskets. In Mexican-American communities across Texas and California, women sold tamale from pushcarts, earning enough to pay rent when their husbands could not find work. A plate of tamale cost 10 cents. A whole pie sold for 25 cents. These women ran businesses without storefronts, licenses, or bank accounts. Their only advertising was the smell drifting down the block and the word of mouth that followed. Health departments eventually cracked down, requiring commercial kitchens and permits that most home cooks could not afford. The cottage food industry that thrives today is really just a return to what American women were doing a century ago, before regulations made feeding your neighbors a crime. Number 15. Harvesting and selling ice. Before electric refrigeration, ice was one of the most valuable commodities in America. Farmers in New England, upstate New York, and the upper Midwest spent winters sawing blocks of ice from frozen lakes and ponds, packing them in sawdust, and storing them in insulated ice houses. A single farmer with a good pond and a strong back could harvest enough ice to earn more than his crops brought in all year. By 1880, the ice trade employed over 90,000 workers and shipped millions of tons as far south as New Orleans, and even to the Caribbean. The pay was backbreaking but reliable. Ice cutters earned between $1 and $2 a day, and the work came during the dead of winter when nothing else could be done. Families depended on that income to bridge the gap between harvest and spring planting. When mechanical refrigeration arrived in the early 1900s, the entire industry collapsed within a generation. Lakes that had supported whole communities went quiet, the ice houses rotted, and one of America's great seasonal economies vanished as if it had melted. First pattern break. Here's where things get interesting, because the next few entries were not just forgotten, they were deliberately buried. Number 14. Taking in laundry. For nearly a century, washing other people's clothes was the most reliable source of income available to American women who could not leave the house. In the decades after the Civil War, formerly enslaved women in the South built an entire economy around laundry. In Atlanta in 1881, washerwomen organized a massive strike, with 3,000 women demanding a uniform rate of $1 per dozen pounds of wash. It was one of the largest labor actions in the post-Reconstruction South. The work was grueling. They hauled water, boiled it over open fires, scrubbed fabric on washboards until their hands cracked and bled, then hung everything to dry and pressed it with heavy, sad irons heated on the stove. A washerwoman in the 1890s might handle 30 to 40 lb of laundry per customer per week, but she set her own schedule, worked from home, and answered to no foreman. When automatic washing machines became affordable in the 1950s, the profession evaporated. Millions of women lost their primary source of income, and one of the most significant economic contributions of black women in American history was reduced to a footnote. Number 13. Running a numbers game in Harlem on the south side of Chicago and in black neighborhoods across urban America. The numbers game was the underground lottery that kept money circulating when legitimate institutions shut their doors. A player picked 3 numbers and placed a bet, sometimes as small as a penny, with a local runner who delivered the slips to a banker. The winning number was drawn from a public source, often the last 3 digits of the day horse racing totals, to prevent rigging. By the 1930s, the numbers racket in Harlem alone generated $20 million a year. It employed thousands as runners, collectors, and counters. Stephanie St. Clair, known as Queenie, ran one of the most successful operations. Using her profits to fund community organizations and fight police corruption, the numbers game was illegal. But in communities locked out of banks, credit, and legitimate business opportunities, it served as both economy and social safety net. When state lotteries arrived in the 1960s and the 1970s, they adopted the exact same model, took the profits, and called it progress. Number 12. Selling blood and plasma. During the Great Depression and well into the 1960s, selling blood was one of the quickest ways for a desperate American to put cash in hand. Blood banks paid between $5 and $25 a pint, depending on the city and the blood type. Skidrows in every major city had donor centers within walking distance of flophouses and soup kitchens. The regulars were known by name. Some donated as often as twice a week, leaving them pale and lightheaded, but with enough money for another night's rent. In the 1940s, the Red Cross relied heavily on paid donors to supply blood for the war effort. The practice came under scrutiny in the 1970s when contaminated blood from paid donors was linked to the spread of hepatitis. Today, selling whole blood is effectively banned in the United States, though plasma donation for compensation remains a multi-billion-dollar industry. The irony is sharp. What was once a survival strategy for the poorest Americans became the foundation of a pharmaceutical supply chain that now generates enormous corporate profits. Number 11. Bootlegging whiskey. Long before Prohibition made it famous, homemade whiskey was currency in rural America. Appalachian farmers discovered early that a bushel of corn worth 50 cents could be distilled into 2 gallons of whiskey worth $4. The math was irresistible. By the late 1700s, whiskey was so widely used as a medium of exchange that when the federal government tried to tax it in 1791, Western Pennsylvania erupted in the Whiskey Rebellion. The tradition never stopped. Through the 1800s and into the early 1900s, families in the hills of Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Carolinas operated stills as naturally as they planted tobacco. Prohibition just made it more profitable. A gallon of moonshine that cost 60s to produce sold for $6 to $8 during the 1920s. Runners modified their cars for speed, outrunning federal agents on mountain roads, a tradition that directly gave birth to NASCAR. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the moonshiners did not stop. Many kept running stills well into the 1960s, not out of rebellion, but because it was the only economy they had ever known. Second pattern break. Now, here's something nobody talks about. The next few entries reveal how American ingenuity did not just survive hardship. It created entire underground economies that the government spent decades trying to destroy. Number 10. Trapping and selling furs. For over 2 centuries, the American fur trade was the economic engine of the frontier. But long after the great trading companies faded, individual trappers continued to earn a living from the woods. Through the 1800s and well into the 1900s, men and boys across the rural Midwest and South ran trap lines in the winter months, catching muskrat, raccoon, mink, and beaver. A prime muskrat pelt brought between 50 cents and $1 in the 1930s, and a skilled trapper could take 30 to 50 pelts in a season. Farm boys supplemented their family's income by running trap lines before and after school, selling pelts to traveling fur buyers who drove county roads in battered trucks. The income was seasonal, but significant. In some rural counties, fur money was the difference between keeping the farm and losing it, as suburban sprawl consumed wild habitat and synthetic fabrics replaced fur. The trapping economy quietly collapsed. The last fur buyers disappeared from rural highways in the 1980s, and with them went a way of life that had sustained American families since before the Revolution. Number 9. Shining shoes. In every American city from the 1880s through the 1960s, shoe-shine boys and men set up wooden boxes on street corners and outside train stations, offering a buff and polish for a nickel or a dime. The work required almost no capital: a box, a few tins of polish, some rags, and a pair of strong hands. Italian immigrant boys dominated the trade in New York. Black men held the corners in Chicago, Atlanta, and Washington. A good shiner at Grand Central Terminal could earn $5 or $6 a day in tips alone during the 1940s. Solid, working-class money. The shoe shine stand was also a listening post, a place where businessmen talked freely and shiners learned the rhythms of money and power. Some used what they heard to start their own businesses. Others simply survived, one pair of shoes at a time. The profession faded as casual dress codes replaced leather dress shoes and sneakers conquered American feet. Today, a shoe shine stand is a novelty, but for 80 years, it was the entry point into the American economy for men who had nothing else to offer but effort. Number 8. Peddling patent medicines. Before the Food and Drug Administration existed, anyone with a wagon, a recipe, and a good story could travel from town to town selling cure-all tonics. In the late 1800s, patent medicine sales in the United States exceeded $75 million annually, and a huge share of that went to independent peddlers working county fairs, frontier towns, and rural crossroads. The products were dubious at best. Most were mixtures of alcohol, opium, or cocaine, blended with herbs and marketed as remedies for everything from consumption to baldness. But the salesmanship was extraordinary. Peddlers staged elaborate shows with music, magic tricks, and testimonials from planted audience members. A good medicine showman could clear $50 in a single night at a county fair, an astronomical sum when factory workers earned $10 a week. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 eventually brought regulation, but the traveling peddlers survived in diminished form into the 1930s. The modern pharmaceutical industry owes its origin story to these wandering hustlers who proved that Americans would pay anything for the promise of good health. Number 7. Midwifery and healing. Midwives, healers, and community care. In every rural community and immigrant neighborhood, women delivered babies, set broken bones, brewed herbal remedies, and nursed the sick, all for a fee or an exchange of goods. Before hospitals became accessible to ordinary Americans, the local midwife was the entire healthcare system. In the early 1900s, midwives delivered roughly half of all babies born in the United States. In the rural South, granny midwives, most of them black women, charged between $2 and $5 per delivery when a doctor charged $25. Some were paid in chickens, flour, or labor instead of cash. Their knowledge was encyclopedic, learned from mothers and grandmothers, covering everything from breech births to childhood fevers. The American Medical Association campaigned aggressively to eliminate midwifery in the early 20th century, calling it primitive and dangerous. State after state passed laws requiring medical licensing, effectively criminalizing the women who had kept their communities alive for generations. The current resurgence of midwifery and herbalism is a rediscovery of knowledge that was never lost. It was taken. Number 6. Selling firewood. In the days before natural gas pipelines and electric heating, firewood was a necessity that every household purchased. and cutting and selling it was one of the most accessible ways to earn money in rural America. A man with an axe, a crosscut saw, and a horse-drawn wagon could fell trees on his own woodlot or on public land, buck the logs into stove lengths, and sell cords to town dwellers who had no land of their own. A cord of hardwood in 1910 sold for between $3 and $6, depending on the region, and a strong man could cut and deliver a cord in 2 days. Entire families participated. Fathers felled the trees, sons split the rounds, mothers and daughters stacked the wagon. The income carried rural households through winter when farm work stopped and cash ran dry. As oil furnaces and central heating spread through American homes in the mid-20th century, the demand for firewood plummeted. What had been an essential winter economy became a weekend hobby. But for a century and a half, the woodpile was as important to the American household economy as the paycheck. Third pattern break. Here is where the story gets personal, because the next entries are not just about forgotten economies, they are about the people your own family might have been. Number 5. Fortune-telling and spiritualism. In the decades after the Civil War, a grief-stricken nation turned to spiritualists, mediums, and fortune-tellers in numbers that seem almost unbelievable today. By some estimates, 11 million Americans consulted spiritualists in the 1870s, out of a population of roughly 40 million. Many of the most successful mediums were women, and the income could be substantial. A popular medium in New York or Chicago charged between $1 and $5 per sitting in the 1880s and could see a dozen clients a day. Some traveled the lecture circuit, filling theaters and earning hundreds of dollars per appearance. The Fox sisters, who launched the spiritualist movement in 1848 from a farmhouse in upstate New York, became national celebrities. Fortune-telling was one of the few professions where a woman could earn more than a man. It required no formal education, no physical strength, and no approval from male gatekeepers. Cities eventually passed ordinances against fortune-telling, classifying it alongside vagrancy and prostitution. But the practice never truly disappeared. It simply moved indoors behind curtained windows and word-of-mouth referrals, where it remains today. Number 4. Collecting and selling scrap metal. During both World Wars, scrap metal became patriotic gold. But long before the government launched collection drives, Americans had been gathering and selling scrap for generations. In the early 1900s, junk dealers in immigrant neighborhoods bought old pots, broken tools, discarded wire, and any piece of metal that could be melted down and reused. A junkyard in 1920s Brooklyn might process 10 tons of scrap in a week, paying collectors by the pound and selling to foundries and steel mills at a markup. Children scoured vacant lots and construction sites. Old men with pushcarts worked the alleys. During the Depression, scrap collecting became a lifeline for the unemployed. When wartime demand sent metal prices soaring in the 1940s, scrap dealers earned more than many factory workers. The industry eventually consolidated into corporate recycling operations, squeezing out the individual collectors who had built it. But for the better part of a century, the American scrap trade was the domain of people with no credentials, no capital, and no options, turning other people's trash into survival. Number 3. Selling homemade liquor during Prohibition. Homegrown liquor and Prohibition profits. When the 18th Amendment banned the sale of alcohol in 1920, it did not stop Americans from drinking. It just redirected the profits. Estimates suggest the illegal liquor trade generated between $3 and $5 billion annually during Prohibition, an astonishing figure in an era when the entire federal budget was under $4 billion, and much of that money flowed not to organized crime bosses, but to ordinary Americans. Housewives brewed beer in their basement. Farmers fermented cider in their barns. Italian immigrants made wine in their cellars, which was technically legal for personal use, and then quietly sold the surplus to neighbors. In cities, speakeasies numbered in the tens of thousands. New York alone had an estimated 30,000 by 1927. The bartenders, bouncers, delivery drivers, and lookouts who staffed them were all earning money outside the formal economy. When you outlaw a product that people want, you do not eliminate the market. You just hand the profits to anyone willing to take the risk. Number 2. Keeping backyard chickens and selling eggs. It sounds quaint now, but keeping a flock of laying hens was one of the most reliable income sources for American women from the colonial period straight through the 1950s. The phrase egg money was literal. Women controlled the chicken flock, collected the eggs, and kept the income as their own. In many rural households, egg money paid for groceries, fabric, medicine, and school supplies. By 1900, a hen could lay around 80 to 100 eggs per year, and a dozen eggs sold for 15 to 25 cents at the general store. A flock of 30 hens meant steady weekly income that did not depend on a husband's wages or the weather cooperating with the crops. The economic independence this gave women was significant and largely unacknowledged. When industrial egg farms scaled up in the 1950s and 1960s, prices collapsed to the point where backyard flocks could not compete. Suburban zoning laws banned chickens from residential areas. One of the oldest and most reliable forms of female economic independence in American history was quietly legislated out of existence. And finally, number 1. Taking in piecework and sewing. The most widespread way Americans made money without a traditional job was also the most invisible. For over a century, women across America took in piecework from garment factories, assembling shirts, stitching buttonholes, finishing seams, and rolling cigars at their kitchen tables while minding children and cooking supper. In 1900, an estimated 250,000 women in New York City alone worked in the home-based garment trade, earning between $2 and $6 a week for labor that factory workers earned twice as much to perform. The tenement apartments of the Lower East Side were both homes and workshops. Children as young as 5 pulled basting threads. Grandmothers trimmed loose ends. Entire families worked by gaslight until midnight to meet quotas. The conditions were the subject of some of America's earliest labor investigations. Reformers called it sweated labor and fought to move it into regulated factories. But in doing so, they eliminated the only form of paid work available to millions of women who could not leave their homes. The sewing machine in the parlor, the pile of cut fabric on the kitchen table, the click of scissors after the children went to bed. That was the sound of American women earning money on their own terms long before anyone called it a side hustle. It was survival, dignity, and independence stitched into every seam. These 20 forgotten ways of making money tell a story that no economics textbook includes. From the rag picker's cart to the washerwoman's tub, from the moonshiner's still to the midwife's hands, Americans found ways to survive that required no employer, no degree, and no permission. The common thread is resourcefulness, turning what you had, your labor, your land, your kitchen, your knowledge into income when the formal economy had no place for you. Most of these ways were not lost naturally. They were regulated away, industrialized out of existence, or simply forgotten when prosperity made them seem unnecessary. But the instinct that created them is still there. And in a country where millions are rethinking what work means, these forgotten methods might be the most relevant history lesson we have. You think the 1970s was all avocado green appliances and shag carpets? Think again. These suburban kitchens served up some of the most creative, economical, and surprisingly satisfying ground beef dishes in American culinary history. Their real recipes served to real families across America during an era of economic uncertainty, gas shortages, and skyrocketing grocery prices. Let's dig into 25 ground beef recipes from the 1970s that kept families fed, happy, and coming back for seconds, even when times were tough. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. This Depression-era holdover became a 1970s lifesaver when beef prices jumped 30% during the early recession. Working-class families from Ohio to Oregon stretched a single pound of ground beef to feed 6 people, and hamburger gravy was their secret weapon. You'd brown the meat in a cast-iron skillet, then create a roux right in that beef fat, stirring in flour until it turned golden. Milk went in next, transforming into a thick, peppery gravy studded with meat. Ladled over a mountain of buttery mashed potatoes, this dish hit your stomach like comfort in a bowl. It meant something beyond nutrition. It meant Mom could make dinner happen even when Dad's paycheck didn't stretch as far. The gravy soaked into those potatoes, creating pockets of savory richness that made you forget you were eating a budget meal. Today's trendy, elevated comfort food wishes it had this kind of soul. And if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane through America's forgotten ground beef recipes, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next culinary time capsule. We've got decades of forgotten foods to uncover together. Porcupine meatballs. Don't let the name fool you. No actual porcupines were harmed in 1970s kitchens. These meatballs got their quirky name from the white rice mixed into the ground beef that poked out during cooking. Looking like tiny quills, popular in church potlucks and ta dinners across Middle America, porcupine meatballs were the dish that brought communities together. You'd combine ground beef with uncooked rice, minced onion, and a beaten egg, rolling them into golf ball-sized spheres. The magic happened when you nestled them into a thick tomato sauce made from Campbell's condensed soup. Nobody used fresh tomatoes when it can cost $29. As they simmered on the stovetop, the rice absorbed the tamatoy liquid, expanding and pushing through the meat. The result was tender meatballs with a unique texture somewhere between a stuffed pepper and a meatloaf. They represented American ingenuity, taking two cheap ingredients and creating something that felt special enough for Sunday supper. Tater tot casserole. Here's where 1970s convenience culture reached its glorious peak. Tater tot casserole, affectionately called hot dish in Minnesota, combined three ingredients Americans couldn't get enough of: ground beef, cream of mushroom soup, and those golden frozen potato cylinders. Invented by Oida in 1953, tater tots became the crown jewel of casserole cooking by the 70s. The assembly was pure simplicity. Brown your beef with onions, spread it in a 9x13 pan, blanket it with condensed soup straight from the can, then create a geometric pattern of frozen tots across the top. 40 minutes in a 350 oven transformed this into a bubbling masterpiece with crispy topped tots and creamy beefy filling underneath. The sound of your fork breaking through that crunchy potato crust into the savory center was the dinner bell of a generation. It showed up at every church basement potluck, every funeral reception, every neighborhood gathering. Fancy? Never delicious? Absolutely. If this casserole represented American efficiency, why complicate dinner when processed perfection was this easy? Old school goulash. American chop suey. Every Midwestern grandmother had her version of this skillet meal. Though calling it goulash would make a Hungarian chef weep, this was American chop suey. The one-pot wonder that saved weekend-night dinners when Mom worked late. Born in school cafeterias during the post-war years, it exploded in home kitchens during the economically strapped 1970s. You'd brown ground beef with diced onions until everything caramelized together. Then dump in elbow macaroni, canned tomatoes, and whatever vegetables were hiding in the crisper drawer. Everything cooked together in one skillet, the pasta soaking up those tamatoy beefy juices until it turned soft and flavor-packed. The beauty was its flexibility. Green peppers if you had them, corn if you didn't, maybe some shredded cheese on top if payday was recent. It bubbled away on the stovetop, filling the house with that familiar savory aroma that meant dinner was almost ready. This wasn't fine dining. This was survival cooking that somehow tasted like home. Beef and cabbage skillet. When grocery budgets got tight in the mid-1970s, cabbage became the unsung hero of American kitchens. At 15 cents a pound, this humble vegetable could bulk up a half pound of ground beef into a meal for $5. Irish and German immigrants had brought cabbage traditions to America generations earlier, but the 70s recession made it mainstream across every ethnic background. You'd start by browning ground beef with onions in your trusty electric skillet, that avocado-colored wedding gift getting daily use. Once the meat rendered its fat, in went thick wedges of cabbage, sizzling and wilting in the beef drippings, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, some salt and pepper, maybe a can of tomatoes if you were feeling flush. The cabbage cooked down into sweet, tender ribbons that absorbed every bit of meaty flavor, transforming from a $1.50 worth of vegetables into something that tasted rich and satisfying. It hit the table steaming hot, often with a side of buttered white bread for soaking up the juices. Nutritionists today would call this a one-pan wonder. Back then, it was just called making it work. Beef and macaroni skillet. Before Hamburger Helper became a household name in 1971, home cooks were already mixing ground beef with macaroni in cast-iron skillets across America. This recipe was the original Helper, stretching meat with pasta and whatever sauce you could improvise. The 1970s version became a weekend night staple because everything happened in one pan. Less cleanup meant more time for your second job or community college night classes. You'd get the beef sizzling first, breaking it into crumbles with a wooden spoon scarred from years of use. Garlic powder went in. Fresh garlic was still exotic in most American suburbs. Then came elbow macaroni, beef broth or bouillon cubes dissolved in water, and a generous pour of ketchup or tomato sauce. The magic was in letting it all simmer together, the pasta cooking directly in that beefy liquid, absorbing every molecule of flavor. When the macaroni turned tender, you'd stir in a handful of shredded cheddar that melted into stringy, gooey pockets throughout. It was simple, quick, and filled bellies without emptying wallets. That was the 1970s kitchen promise. Delivered in 30 minutes. Chipwreck casserole. With a name straight out of a church cookbook, chipwreck casserole earned its spot on 1970s tables through sheer audacity. Someone looked at ground beef, crushed potato chips, and condensed soup and thought, let's bake this together. The result was polarizing, but undeniably popular at potlucks from Texas to Michigan. The architecture was simple but specific. Brown ground beef mixed with cream of mushroom or cream of chicken soup created the foundation. You'd layer this in a casserole dish. Then comes the controversial part, an entire bag of crushed potato chips mixed throughout and piled on top. Cheese was optional, but encouraged, usually the orange kind that came pre-shredded in a bag. Into the oven it went, emerging with those chips somehow transformed. The ones on top stayed crunchy, while the ones inside turned into salty, starchy pockets that absorbed the creamy sauce. Every bite was a texture adventure. Crispy, creamy, meaty, and absurdly indulgent. Nutritionists weren't invited to 1970s potlucks, and chipwreck casserole was living proof. It represented an era when processed foods weren't the enemy. They were the exciting future of American cooking. Meatloaf muffins. Somebody in the 1970s had a brilliant realization. Meatloaf took forever to bake, but muffin-sized portions would cook in a fraction of the time. Thus, meatloaf muffins were born. Perfect for busy families racing between soccer practice and Tupperware parties. You'd mix ground beef with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, eggs, diced onions, and enough ketchup to make the mixture slightly sweet. But instead of packing it into a loaf pan for an hour-long bake, you'd scoop it into greased muffin tins, creating individual portions that cooked in just 25 minutes. The genius was in the surface area. Each muffin developed a caramelized crust all the way around. Unlike traditional meatloaf that only got crispy on the outside edges, kids loved them because they felt like personal-sized dinners. And Mom loved them because you could freeze extras for emergency meals. They'd emerge from the oven with their tops glazed in a ketchup-brown sugar mixture that turned sticky and slightly charred. Served with instant mashed potatoes and canned green beans, this was efficiency eating at its finest. The 1970s didn't slow down for anyone, and neither did dinner. Beef and biscuit ring. This recipe looked impressive enough for company, but was secretly easy enough for a Tuesday night, making it perfect for the aspirational 1970s homemaker. The presentation was pure vintage showmanship. Ground beef baked in the center of a Pillsbury biscuit ring, emerging from the oven, looking like something from a magazine. You'd brown ground beef with onions and seasonings, maybe add some corn or green beans for color and vegetables. While that cooled slightly, you'd arrange refrigerated biscuit dough in a circle on a baking sheet, overlapping slightly to create a connected ring. The beef mixture got spooned into the center. Then you'd fold the biscuit edges over the filling, leaving the middle exposed. 30 minutes at 375, and you had a golden flaky ring with savory beef filling peeking through. The biscuits absorbed some of that beef juice, turning tender and flavorful. When you brought this to the table, it looked like you'd spent hours on dinner. The secret? 15 minutes of actual work stayed between you and the empty Pillsbury tube in the trash. This was 1970s entertaining. Impressive results through convenient shortcuts. No apologies necessary. Porcupine rice bake. While porcupine meatballs simmered on the stovetop, their cousin porcupine rice bake took the concept to the oven for a more hands-off approach. Perfect for the working mothers. Increasingly common in 1970s America, this casserole required assembly time, but no babysitting while it cooked. The principle remained the same. Uncooked rice mixed directly into the ground beef created those characteristic quills poking out, but instead of forming individual meatballs, you'd press the mixture into a casserole dish, making it faster to assemble. The baking liquid was key. Tomato soup thinned with water, or if you were feeling fancy, a mixture of tomato sauce and beef bouillon. The casserole baked covered for an hour, the rice slowly absorbing liquid and swelling, pushing through the meat layer like an edible pincushion. What made this version special was the top, uncovered for the final 15 minutes. It developed a slightly crusty caramelized surface that added textural contrast. Served with a simple salad and some garlic bread, this was the kind of meal that made you look like you had it all together, even when you were juggling 2 jobs and 3 kids. Beef jambalaya bake. The 1970s saw Americans experimenting with exotic regional cuisines, though filtered through a Midwestern sensibility. Beef jambalaya bake was what happened when Louisiana's complex rice dish met the convenience culture of suburban casserole cooking. Traditional jambalaya's hours-long process got streamlined into a 45-minute bake that still captured some Creole spirit, even if purists would call it heresy. You'd brown ground beef with the Holy Trinity bell peppers, onions, and celery, though many recipes suggested using dried onion flakes instead. Canned tomatoes went in along with white rice. And here's where the 1970s showed up. Instead of stock and careful seasoning, most recipes called for a packet of Lipton's onion soup mix. Everything went into a casserole dish with enough water to cook the rice, then baked covered until the grains turned tender. The result wasn't authentic New Orleans cooking, but it was spicy, hearty, and different enough from the usual rotation to feel adventurous. It represented American food culture's simultaneous curiosity about regional cooking and unwillingness to abandon convenience. Served with a side of cornbread, it brought a taste of Louisiana to kitchens that had never seen the Mississippi hamburger biscuit bake. Here was another marriage of ground beef and refrigerated biscuit dough, but with a different personality than the biscuit ring. Hamburger biscuit bake layered everything into a casserole dish, creating a complete meal where fluffy biscuits absorbed savory beef juices from below. The 1970s loved this formula. Convenience products elevated through clever assembly. You'd start with brown ground beef mixed with cream of mushroom soup, maybe some frozen mixed vegetables for color and virtue. This went into a 9x13 pan, spreading evenly across the bottom. Then came the fun part, tearing those refrigerated biscuits into quarters and arranging them across the top like a savory cobbler. Some recipes called for brushing the biscuit pieces with melted butter and sprinkling them with garlic powder, details that separated good cooks from great ones. As it baked, the biscuits puffed up into golden clouds while their bottoms soaked in the creamy beef mixture below. The contrast was irresistible. Crispy, buttery tops with soft gravy soaked under sides. This was comfort food geometry, each element perfectly positioned to enhance the others. It proved you didn't need culinary school. You just needed an understanding of how flavors and textures could work together. Mock prime rib patties. The mock trend of the 1970s reached peak aspiration with mock prime rib patties. Ground beef dressed up to feel luxurious during economically tight times. When actual prime rib cost a week's grocery budget, home cooks created recipes that captured the essence without the expense. These weren't just hamburgers. They were an attitude. You'd mix ground beef with breadcrumbs, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and the secret ingredient, liquid smoke. That bottled smoke flavor was a 1970s kitchen staple, bringing campfire authenticity to suburban stovetops. The beef got formed into thick patties, seared in a hot skillet until crusty and brown, then finished with a sauce made from condensed mushroom soup thinned with red wine or beef broth. The presentation mattered. These weren't served on buns, but plated like steaks, maybe with roasted potatoes and canned asparagus on the side. When you cut into them, they weren't medium rare like real prime rib, but that charred crust and savory sauce created enough theater to feel special. They appeared at anniversary dinners, birthday celebrations, any occasion that deserved something beyond everyday cooking. Nobody was fooled, but that wasn't the point. These patties represented dignity when budgets couldn't afford luxury. Beef and potato hash casserole. Breakfast for dinner became increasingly popular in the economically strained 1970s. And beef and potato hash casserole brought that concept to its logical conclusion. This was cowboy cooking meets suburban convenience with ground beef, replacing the traditional corned beef hash, and frozen hash browns replacing fresh potatoes. Speed was the selling point. The entire dish went from package to oven in under 10 minutes. You'd mix brown ground beef with thawed hash browns, cream of celery soup, sour cream, and shredded cheddar cheese. Everything combined in a casserole dish, topped with crushed cornflakes, mixed with melted butter for crunch. An hour in the oven transformed these humble ingredients into a golden bubbling mass that smelled like Saturday morning and tasted like pure comfort. The hash browns turned creamy inside with crispy edges. The beef added heartiness, and that cornflake topping provided the textural contrast that made every bite interesting. Families served this with fried eggs on top for actual breakfast-dinner fusion or alone as a one-dish meal. It reflected the 1970s breakdown of food rules. If something tasted good and saved time, who cared what meal it was supposed to be? Beef tamalake, despite its religious-sounding name, beef tamalake had nothing to do with worship and everything to do with architectural cooking. This was basically shepherd's pie's American cousin, made with ground beef instead of lamb and loaded with corn, because Americans put corn in everything during the 1970s.